Hello and welcome to Jockeys, the podcast. I'm Adam McNamara, and this is the racing podcast where we strip away the guarded versions of jockeys that you see every day on TV, giving them the platform to tell us what they really think. We talk about their regrets and aspirations, and we have a couple of laughs along the way as well.
In this episode, Alan Johns.
In my head, I think I haven't got out in one piece yet. All of a sudden felt like it was the present and I was completely unprepared. That's the wrong reason to sort of prolong a career in such a dangerous sport. You know, she knows me well enough, I'm not afraid of the limelight. I feel a bit guilty talking about this now off the back of you explaining that you didn't get your way with it all.
You should feel guilty, yeah.
She treats it as if I'm socialising with friends. So I'm like, Chloe, this is work. You've got to understand this. I literally was floating for a week after that day and having so many friends and family there.
Yeah, the more I'm listening to you talk, the worse I'm feeling about my own career. Welcome to Jockeys, the podcast, Alan. It's really good to get you on. You're quite unique in the sense that any other podcast I'm going to do, generally speaking, is going to be with current jockey who's still riding, and you've just gone through the retirement process, as it were. But I'm going to treat it as if you're still a jockey, because in a lot of ways you are still a jockey. It's part of your identity. But I want to go directly to your social media and the work that you've done the last couple of years, because I found it fascinating to watch. From what I first noticed you doing was around the Chepstow Jump Jockeys Flat Derby. I think that's what it was. You did a piece around that and got all the other jump jockeys involved, and it was really entertaining viewing, and it was quite unique for jockeys, I think, to do something like that. So can you tell me how that started, what inspired it, and how you've kind of transitioned on to where you are now?
Thanks for having me on to start with. So the Jump Jockeys flat race, the derby we had, that was probably one of the starting points of my social media journey, if you want to make it sound a bit cringy. Basically I'd just been asked in that summer to help organise the race by Phil Bell, who runs Chepstow and a few other race courses. And in our planning of it, he just said we need to do some promotion work for the race. And I said, should we do something a bit different? And I think I just started with one line in my head that we could almost have a jockey, say, talking down about another jockey, saying, as long as I avoid, James Bowen in the race, I'll be happy, sort of thing. And it all just built up from there, really. So we created this sort of mockumentary, I suppose. So it was only a couple of minutes long, where all the jockeys were, talking to camera or talking to the chap alongside the camera, just explaining their thoughts about how much they wanted to win the race and all that sort of stuff. And felt like it all seems so obvious after the event, because it was quite well received and the jockeys really embraced it on the day. But I remember feeling quite apprehensive in the week or two leading up to it, because it was something quite different. And I remember ringing around every jockey individually who was coming to the filming on the day and saying, look, between you and me, do you mind just like buying into this? Don't start saying it's cringy and sort of start being like disinterested school kids, and just do me a favor here and help me out. And I went through every single one of the jockeys like that, basically. And but I think I needn't have, really, because they arrived on the day, and after the first 10 minutes, when they started filtering in one by one, all the jockeys got really into it. And to the point in the end where people were suggesting to go off script and do these other things, and I actually became like a bit of a possessive director, and I was like, can we just stick to the script, guys? Come on. So that was one of the first things I did. And at the same time, I'd been asked by the Jockey Club to do a sort of light-hearted weekly video, just recapping what's going on around the country in jump racing and what we've got to look forward to. And I think they started, or the jockey video was launched within a month of the Jockey Club weekly video starting. So it almost gave me a bit of a springboard then. The whole process probably started to gain a bit of traction or become a possibility about 6 months earlier when I had a ride in the Grand National. And I think it was the first year where the Irish really took over the race. So there was going to be relatively few British runners, and I was riding a grey horse for Tim Vaughan, and we weren't the sort of usual suspects like a Nichols or a Big Yard to be having horses in the race. So we got what I believe to be well over our share of media attention, and I just decided around that time just to embrace it all really and try and start putting my real personality across, that I would, the personality I would use when I was with my friends I felt comfortable with. And I had a little thing where I just wanted to just try and drop one little joke into every interview. And just that mindset sort of made me, I don't know, I suppose a lot cheerier and more smiley, or whatever the phrase is, in every interview. And I think it was off the back of that the Jockey Club asked me to start making the videos. So that was the first step. Then, that those 2 videos going out in the October, and then from there, really, it's all just sort of snowballed. And I gradually, it's still been a process. It's been 18 months now since that time. And, even in the last few months, I've been feeling my way into new areas where I've been getting my phone out in a packed weighing room and just like asking people to take part in videos in front of everyone. Whereas probably 3 or 4 months before that, I would have been sort of waiting for the opportunity when there was like only a couple around, or I'd have someone on their own. So, it's definitely been a process, and yes, something I've probably felt my way into, and felt like I was been pushing myself all along to try and not be too self-conscious when I'm doing it, because I think the reception's been, at least people I've spoken to, has been quite good, really. So I just enjoy doing it, and now I'm looking to try and make a career out of that and other things linked to it. And now I've got to really commit, I suppose.
And were there concerns for yourself? Obviously, you've spoken about the broader audience, let's say, being very positive, but within the industry itself, like I would have felt like if I was still, like, I never did anything when I was still racing, even though I kind of wanted to, because I just felt like, I'll get negative feedback from trainers, owners, other jockeys. Was that something that was really heavy on your mind, particularly early on, that I'm taking a risk here, that I start messing around on social media and trainers and owners don't take me seriously as a jockey?
I think it's probably less of a risk for me in my situation, because I spent the last few seasons of my career riding predominantly for Tim Vaughan and a couple of other trainers. Victor Dartner, like he's retired a year ago. I don't know if he knows what social media is. He's actually a great character, Victor. So and Sam Allwood as well. And I always felt that they, Victor probably was unaware, but Sam, I felt like was positive towards it. And then Tim, who I sort of be very close with, he was very, very supportive of it. And I think what I noticed very quickly on, with the connections and owners where, you're dealing with people you might meet for the first time, or you only see them once every 6 months, and there's a lot more people coming and going, and you'd be less aware of potentially of how they all feel towards it. In reality, though, I very quickly got a sense that, when I walked into the paddock, that was the first thing that people wanted to talk to me about. I almost felt like sometimes I'd be meeting people for the first time, and I might go in and be, try and be sort of energetic and sort of engaging or whatever. But I sort of would bring a bit of formal manners, when coming into the paddock and meeting someone like that for the first time. And I was often met by somebody who sort of felt like they knew me from my social media, and they'd act towards me as if they were already my friend a bit. And you can sort of, and they'd mention the social media, and, I feel like they were like ready to laugh they're almost coming in where they had a bit of energy about them. And so just from judging, what was in front of me every day and going into the paddock and dealing with all the different connections, I would say it was that side of it was definitely wholeheartedly positive and would very quickly sort of put any fears to rest. I could understand how somebody with a very high profile job, maybe a Harry Cobden with Nichols perhaps, or somebody who's riding for a lot of big yards might not want to put themselves out there, because they're having, to me, their profile as a jockey probably stands on its own 2 feet anyway. So they've got that sort of standing within the sport. They're earning plenty of money. They don't need to diversify, and why take the risk for that extra effort? So I could see why somebody could be, far more cautious than I was, and maybe if I was sort of in a top 5 in the championship position, you're just too busy to even worry about sort of that sort of side of things. But having said that, I think the more you can show you're more human and bring your personality more on social media and interviews and any sort of media interaction without sort of needing to make a video where you sort of do a review of the chicken nuggets at a race course. You don't have to go to that length. You can do it. You can let your guard down without sort of risking, people not enjoying it. So I think it's quite easy to straddle to without going as far as I have then.
Let's talk about, just because you brought it up really briefly, chicken nuggets at race courses. I think was an inspired piece of work that you did. If I had one criticism, I would say, from my experience, I think you were far too nice about the chicken nuggets, because I think chicken nuggets are such a basic thing to get right. And a lot of race courses, they're not even technically chicken nuggets. If you read the description, they're battered chicken chunks, and they're chewy, dry. And I feel like you were maybe you were just getting them on good days. I felt like you were a bit nice, but like, chicken nuggets are basic, aren't they? Should we not be striving for 10 out of 10 chicken nuggets at every race course?
Yeah, definitely. But look, I probably, I think the first one I did was, I think it was Utoxeter, and the lady there saw me the next meeting. I think might have been at Worcester or back at Utoxeter, and she'd seen it, and I thought, oh, yeah, I don't want to, this is lighthearted, it's fun. It's not the end of the world. I didn't really want to go and offend anyone too much, so I didn't take the scoring too seriously, really. You are right, though. Yeah, they are. Some of them, sometimes they look like they've been cooked in a kettle rather than sort of fried or whatever, or in an oven. So because they get a bit sort of little bit anemic. But is that a word? Is that the word, anemic? I get that mixed up with.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it looks a bit watery and not much colour to it. But yeah, I'm probably not too much of a controversial character, so I probably just stay clear of getting deep in it too much,
I really enjoyed. I saw you on Luck on Sunday of the week, and I really enjoyed it because you kind of half hijacked the interview and took it off Nick Luck at one stage and started asking questions to Rafe Beckett. And not only did you do that, which I think takes a bit of courage when you're on a sofa opposite Nick Luck, who's obviously a renowned presenter, particularly in racing. It takes courage to do that, but then also the questions you asked were really articulate, interesting questions. I wasn't sat there going, oh, here's Alan Johns taking over the interview asking stupid questions. It was like the questions you asked, I was like, that's a brilliant question. I actually want to know the answer. And Rafe gave you very articulate answers. Did that feel like, when you were doing it, did that feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this? This is taking a bit of courage. Or did it feel quite natural?
I think the only thing I'm conscious of is like, it's quite difficult to, at times, to like interrupt the conversation in a non-interrupting manner. So that was the only thing I was conscious of. I was actually keen. I wanted to know the answers to the questions I was asking, and so I was sort of confident on that front. But it was just sort of managing to edge my way in without sort of interrupting the flow was the only thing I was thinking, and I was slightly conscious that I'd made a little joke earlier in the, I think it was in the 2-minute where just the talking points where I'd made light of a situation that Rafe Beckett felt very passionate about.
Yeah.
And he didn't quite sort of see the funny side of my joke, which is fair. I didn't really expect him to, but I was a bit I was conscious that I wanted to win Rafe back over, so I was like, I can be serious, Rafe. Look at this. But yeah, I think it's, I think that when I don't have confidence in myself, when I'm sort of talking on camera or in those situations, is if I don't feel like I know what I'm talking about, and I'm trying to force talking for the sake of it. So I actually feel if I've got conviction in what I'm saying, then that I find that quite sort of natural then.
I think it's interesting that you've got that insight already. That sounds like the insight of someone who's naturally going to be good at this sort of thing, if that makes sense. Otherwise, I feel like you'd be just kind of winging it. But it seems like you formulate in your head when you should be getting involved, asking questions. You're asking the right sort of questions. So to anybody who might be watching the podcast, this is a good advertisement, I think, for Alan Johns let's get him on a racing channel.
Yeah, I've sort of been joking that since my retirement, I've been on sort of a marketing tour, trying to plug my retirement as much as I could, and the fact that I'm sort of open for work opportunities going forward. So yeah, no, thanks for picking up on that. That's definitely what I'm pushing a little bit. But I try and whenever I'm trying to do something like that, I'm like, oh, it's tongue in cheek. But yeah, hopefully people take it seriously as well.
Definitely. Let's talk about retirement then, because you've mentioned the word retirement a couple of times, and I find this fascinating purely from my own perspective and experience. The word retirement, I think, is a funny one, and I remember when I was coming to retire. Obviously, I retired at 25, so a good bit younger than you retired, and after a much less successful career than you would have had. But I was speaking to a sort of a career mentor at the time, didn't know what I wanted to do, and we were trying to put together a CV. And he kept saying to me, "Oh, you need to stop using the word retirement. It's not a retirement; it's a transition," which I understood from his perspective. He was trying to maybe make me feel better about having to move on at that stage of life. But I said, no, I've got to call it a retirement, otherwise I won't be able to let it go. I'm gonna have to shut the door on it. From your perspective, you've still retired relatively young for a jockey. I think plenty would argue you had some good years left in you with plenty of winners left to ride. You've obviously made the decision to retire. How difficult was that decision? And does it feel like in your mind it's difficult to close the door, or are you finding the transition? I know you're early days still, but are you finding the transition easy or difficult at this point?
I found the decision quite easy. I'm really quite passionate about this sort of media stuff I've been doing over the last couple of years, and I've wanted to do that as my next career for quite some time. And then so I've got an exciting reason to finish riding or when I stop. And then alongside that, my career had plateaued in terms of numbers. I was not having enough rides or winners, and I couldn't really see that changing. I could have spent a lot more time. I could have doubled down and spent a lot more time riding out at new yards and driving a couple of hours first thing in the morning and spending 4 hours in the car there and back and not getting paid and maybe not getting any rides. And so, but the risk of doing that was that I would have to give up the balance for me for the last couple of years is that my riding career and my sort of social media and media stuff has tied in perfectly, where I seem to have a full working week between the two. And so to start riding out in other yards, I'd have to give up some of my media stuff. And because I want to go down that road, I actually saw it as and you mentioned I sort of still had some years left in me. I'm 35 and, relatively lightly raced in horse racing terms. So I haven't had, I could have easily kept going for, 5+ years really. But I just saw it as an opportunity to sort of grab the bull by the horns now and try and make some headway rather than keeping going for 5 more years. And I think another thing is that people have said to me along the way is that like I will lose some of my unique selling points as somebody who can create content or talk in media once I stop being a jockey. And that's definitely correct. And I could see some of the things I've been doing sort of stopping because I finished riding, but that's the wrong reason to sort of prolong a career in such a dangerous sport. You know, I think you can't sort of just sort of go half in, half out. You have to be sort of all in. And it was coming to the point where I think I was sort of all in. I became very good at compartmentalizing. So I'd run every day when I wasn't racing because I wanted to be fit when I got to the races, and I'd take the job seriously. I'd ride out for a couple of hours every morning. But if I dropped any below that again, I think my riding would probably suffer. And I just think with the risk of injury and how sort of serious and intense the sport is, I didn't want to go down that road.
One thing that I wanted to ask you about, because it's one thing that still annoys me to this day, is when I knew I was going to retire, I wanted to try and retire on a winner. And I said it to like a couple of trainers I was riding for. I was like, look, I'm on the way out, but basically if you can give me one, then and it wins, I can retire on that, on the back of it, and it'd be lovely. And I had one lined out. There was a 2-year-old that had galloped around Kempton and had basically won its gallop by about 10 lengths, and it was going to be the one, and then it got injured, and I just didn't find another one. And I was always a little bit resentful that I didn't end on a winner. Obviously, you managed to organize it in such a way that, and obviously there's a little bit of luck involved. It's not as easy to manufacture as it might seem, but you managed to end on a winner. What did that feel like, getting to that last ride and getting the kind of fairy tale ending to be able to sign off on the back of a winner? Because I think that's kind of what everybody wants, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I feel a bit guilty talking about this now off the back of you explaining that you didn't get your way with it all.
You should feel guilty, yeah.
But I'm not going to hold back. It was absolutely magic, to be honest. So I decided I wanted to finish at Ffoslas, and because that is I'm from West Wales originally, so it's halfway between where I live now and where I'm from. So I knew it'd be a good place for, I wanted a lot of friends and family to be there. So I knew it'd be quite accessible for everyone. And it's always been my favorite race course. It's such a easy track to ride around, such a big galloping track. And the main reason that for the love of Ffoslas is that the weighing room there just seems to be such a relaxed environment. I don't know I think it must be a function of what a nice track it is to ride around, but I just feel like it feels like you're point to point in it. It just feels like, everybody is so sort of for having a laugh there. So I knew I wanted to do it there. And so I looked at, so that narrowed me down a bit, and I knew I wanted to sort of, take control of the situation a little bit and try and coordinate it and because I'm so, I've been with Tim for so long, I have the ability to do that a little bit. So I went through the Ffoslas meetings coming up in February time, looking at March, April and May and whatever. And I looked at the races that were there on the day, and I knew with the day I actually ended up finishing on, there was 3 or 4 races that I knew that we'd have, that Tim would have a couple of horses that he could put in each race. So, it was quite likely I'd be able to coordinate something to win. And as it happened, the last race was perfectly suited to a horse called Bumpy Evans, who I rode and went on to win. And I'd say he's a horse that I felt like he was unexposed, and he'd won the time before, and he was well handicapped in my head, and probably a couple of things could go wrong for him and he could still potentially win. But the only negative about it all is that he is a bit mad. He's tapped in the head, really. And I have this. I'm not superstitious at all. But one of my ways in which I'm not superstitious about many things. But one of the ways in which I am is that I hate sort of the thought of jinxing myself, counting my chickens. When I was speaking to people about my retirement in the week leading up to finishing, people would say, "Oh, it's great, you've got out in one piece," which, for the sake of the conversation, was the correct thing to say. and I would just go along with it. But in my head, I'd think, I haven't got out in one piece yet. A bad fall happens on any given ride rather than you need 200 of them, if you know what I mean. So I took my last rides very seriously, and I was trying to work out the feelings behind this, and I've spoken to a couple of people about it, and another way of doing it, of saying it that other people have been able to relate to, is if you're riding and then going on holiday the next day, or you've got some big do on, and you would think, it would cross your mind that it'd be a shame to have a bump today. Say I'm going away to Spain for a week tomorrow. It'd be the worst thing in the world if I broke my arm today or something like that. So it's not a sort of a big bodily issue. It's just almost like that sense applied to my last few rides, that something could just as easily go wrong on these 3 rides or 4 rides as any other 3 rides in my career, sort of thing. And so the fact that he's sort of such a nut job, I suppose, and maybe his reputation's slightly worse than the reality of it. But I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to, like, there's a few horses in the yard there that, although any horse can fall, you never feel like you're going to fall on. You could almost close your eyes and everything feels smooth. Where Bumpy, he tried to bolt with me to the start the time before at Leicester. I went down early and it took me like 10 minutes to get there. And then he went like 35 lengths clear and then got headed halfway down the back and came back to win. So he's not a straightforward horse. But I just knew he was the one, really. And then I had 4 on the day, and the first 3 all had half chances that you think, you can make a case for any of them. None of them won, which turned out to be the best thing in the end, because it became a bit of a story on the day where you were on this seeming decline and things were going to fizzle out, and then came to Bumpy Evans, and it was quite, because I'd announced it on the morning, it meant that I probably got quite a lot of attention on the day, and which I wasn't sure about if I wanted or not, really. But I just didn't want the thought of, do I have to go around explaining to certain people on the day? I just wanted to be out in the open so everybody just knew. And so I wanted to go to the start 5 minutes early on him. And as I went to do that, the clerk of the course grabbed me because they wanted to do a presentation before the race. And I was like, oh no, I really don't want to, I've got to go on this horse to get down to the start early. And she thought I was just trying to get out of it. Now, if she knows me well enough, I'm not afraid of the limelight. So I would have normally lapped it up. So I was a bit distracted at that point. But then I got a round of applause coming into the paddock, and there was quite a few people there. And that's the one thing that always gets me on a film, gets me a bit emotional, as if when there's a big round of applause. And actually I was getting a bit emotional about it all. And then I was jumping between the emotions of getting caught up in the moment and emotional, and being like, right, I've got to get on this blinking horse and go, and being serious. Anyway, got on him. The race didn't go to plan at all. He absolutely halved the first, and he landed on another one halfway around and ended up winning. But it actually felt like, it felt like the biggest win of my career. It was the crowd were revved, I felt, and having not looked like winning, to go in and winning. And it was only, of course, a 0 to 100 round fast last. But when you apply that approach, every race is effectively galloping around the field trying to finish in front of the other horses. You can sort of take away the meaning to anything. And on that day, it was ended up being easily my favorite day of my riding career. So it was, I actually was, I'm still a bit buzzing about it now, but I literally was floating for a week after that day, and having so many friends and family there, and it all coming together. So it was, sorry, Adam, you did really miss out, I gotta say.
Yeah, the more I'm listening to you talk, the worse I'm feeling about my own career. So thanks for that. It's really, really bringing me down. You mentioned that you have a wife, and I want to talk about your love life from the perspective of a jockey, because I think I've actually been asking myself why I want this to be a running theme. And I think part of it is I just love the gossip. And 2 is I think it is really interesting and kind of unique thing, and everybody's got a different perspective, because different jockeys will be single and struggling. Some will have relationships, be struggling. Some will have relationships and they'll just work out fine, and it's not something to think about. For you, from your perspective, having a wife and being a jockey and throughout your career dealing with relationships, is it something you found really difficult? Because obviously you don't have much time. You're dealing with a lot of ups and downs and loss. It's difficult not to take that home. How did you manage it throughout your career?
Well, but probably for me, because I wasn't riding as frequently and had the volume of rides I wanted, I'd be, through the busy part of the season, I'd be racing 3 days a week, perhaps. And then I'd be, about or working from home, doing my social media and things the other days. So for me, it's probably more of a standard relationship setup in those terms, where I wasn't away all the time. Interestingly, though, like Chloe's my wife's name, and she never batted an eyelid about me driving 3.5 hours and being out of the house for 16 hours to ride 2 slow horses around Doncaster with no chance at all. But all of a sudden, if I'm going to Sandown tomorrow with Race Day TV, doing a bit of like social media work, she treats it as if I'm socializing with friends. So I'm like, Chloe, this is work. You've got to understand this. Like, it's a fun job, but this is work. And it's funny. It's like a little bit of friction, or not really friction, but like she's, that when I was going to ride a 33-1 and a 16-1 shot at Doncaster in the wind and the rain, she didn't, she was all for that. But like being out of the house for the same amount of time to go to Sandown now seems like a different proposition. But hopefully we'll adjust on that. But for me, it was always quite easy, that side of things, because I wasn't so busy. Chloe understands the racing really well, and she would actually give me. She'd always have an opinion on how a horse would run. I'd ring her up on the way home, and she'd, "Oh, that horse ran crap, didn't it?" And I'd say, "I didn't think it was too bad." And she'd explain something that happened in the race, and then I'd say, "Did you actually watch it?" And she said, "No, I just read the result." But she'd like read the little write up as if and talk me through it as if she'd like lived and breathed every second of it. But she never got too. She was never too worried about me, from an injury perspective or would stress about that side of things. I know other people probably would, my parents would probably worry about that, but they wouldn't let on, and probably plenty of other jockeys, partners, that would be a sort of constant thing hanging over them and add a little bit of pressure. But no, I got no excuses on the relationship front. If there was any sort of disagreements or arguments, it wasn't because of my work-life balance anyway.
And looking forwards then for the transition for your relationship, obviously into more social media work and potential punditry and things like that, do you think you're going to get some criticism from Chloe? Like, will she tell you straight up if you were making a fool of yourself on the TV or social media? Does she get stuck in, or is she supportive of that as she was with your racing career?
Well, first of all, she's very straight with me about whatever she thinks. So she tells me exactly what she thinks. But I don't think she'll criticize me too much on that, because I have a job to get her to watch my videos and my stuff. Really, she's I'll actually, there'll be something I think is like that I'm a bit proud of. I think is better than the normal ones, and I'll say, "Oh, what do you think of that?" And she'll say, "Oh, it just hasn't come up on my phone." And then I'll catch her like scrolling past one of my videos when I'm looking over her shoulder. I'm like, "Come on, it's all about the average watch time. You've got to like it. Come on." So she started giving me token likes now, but I don't think the average watch time is being helped by her scrolling by so quickly. No, but she's pretty straight, and she's got a good feel for it all, really. She's very, very supportive, really supportive, and I found her brilliant over the last year, probably in particular, to talk through, because there's, as you've gone through the journey of finishing, and probably also experienced, like, as a jockey, things not going, your career going in the trajectory you wanted to. I've had that plenty of times, and when I want to when I'm having a wobble, like I did the fortnight before I retired, she will, although I can't get her to watch my 90-second video, she will sort of put an hour of attention to one side for me, and I find her really sort of balanced and helpful on that, and probably coming from a outsider's perspective and fresh up, sometimes when you're so ingrained in the way you think about, either being a jockey or, for me being a jockey and, making these videos, or I'll do some media work for someone and I'll come home disappointed because I felt like we should have gone this way with it and they didn't want to hear my opinion, and I'm not that happy with the result of something or whatever. I find like she brings a real sort of point of balance to it all, really. So that side of it is will hopefully remain sort of a positive for us anyway.
Yeah, that's good. Sounds very refreshing. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel like, Jenny, there was a bunch more questions I wanted to ask you, and I feel like I could have gone on for another hour, but we're fairly limited on time, so we're going to have to call it there. But I think it's safe to say we'll be seeing plenty more of Alan Johns across social media, on the TV, hopefully as well, sooner rather than later. And I'm really looking forward to it. I found you really insightful, refreshing, and entertaining for the last 18 months, and that's only going to get bigger and better, I'm sure. So want to wish you all the best for that, and hopefully at some stage might get you back on Jockeys, the podcast, to talk about some of the stuff we didn't get through today. So yeah, thanks very much for being on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for your kind words, and thanks for having me on. And yeah, if this does numbers and we get in the top 10 of sporting podcasts, or maybe worldwide overall podcast, maybe we can do a part 2.
Yeah, maybe we can team up and do a joint podcast and just run it on our own. Yeah,
maybe we should lower our expectations on the top 10 in the world of any podcast. But yeah, no, absolutely. I'm open for work anyway. So yeah, we'll see.
Cool. Been a pleasure.
Perfect. Cheers, Adam.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.